After Spider-Man 3, we talked to Sony about doing a Spider-Man 4 with Tobey. And we went pretty far down the road. There were a couple different versions of the story. And I think, that ultimately there was a feeling that it was time to reinvent, to start fresh.
Spider-Man 3 is a film surrounded by mixed fan opinions. Being the follow-up of two beloved films, audiences expected Spider-Man 3 to top its predecessors. Unfortunately, because of studio interference, bad writing, and creative differences, Spider-Man 3 was not the magnum opus fans had expected. The film may have been a massive success financially, but its critical reception left a sour taste in the mouths of critics, the general public, the fans, and most importantly, Sam Raimi himself. Raimi did not love Spider-Man 3. In fact, he believes the film was awful and uninspired. This was not the film that fans deserved. So when Spider-Man 4 entered development, he wanted to return to what made the first two films so great and craft the greatest Spider-Man film to ever hit the screen. This is a story about creative interference, the tedious nature of studio filmmaking, and the stress of meeting a release deadline. This is the story of Spider-Man 4 and its unfortunate cancellation.
I'm Spider-Man.
After the financial success of Spider-Man 3, Sony immediately began work on a sequel. At the time, it was unknown if Sam Raimi would direct the film. In a 2007 interview with MTV, Raimi states that he does not know if he'll direct Spider-Man 4, but if he's presented with the right story, he'd love for Sony to bring him back. If not, then he's perfectly okay with a new director taking over. A couple of months later, Sony and Raimi meet with many writers who all pitch their own ideas for the film. Raimi is looking for the ideal writer who can perfectly formulate the right story for the film. Unlike the other films, Raimi will have less involvement in crafting the story, as he wants a writer that can create a new and fresh take on the Spider-Man series and decide how Peter's character will evolve. In October of 2007, writer James Vanderbilt would be hired to pen the script. Raimi spoke to Vanderbilt about the story and loved what the writer had in mind. However, at this point in time, Raimi was still unsure about the future and hoped the script was good enough for him to embrace. On June 20th of 2008, producer Laura Zinskin announced that Spider-Man 4 was scheduled for a May 2011 release. There was still no script ready at the time, but Sony was optimistic they could get the film out within 3 years. On September 5th of 2008, Deadline Hollywood would report that Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire officially signed contracts for Spider-Man 4. Surprisingly, Sam Raimi and Tobey not only signed contracts for Spider-Man 4, but also Spider-Man 5. By October, there was still no script ready for the film. Due to this, Raimi was unsure of who the villain would be, at least until Vanderbilt turned in his draft. Unfortunately, it seems like Raimi was not a fan of what Vanderbilt had to offer, as David Lindsay Aubert would be brought in to rewrite the script on October 30th of 2008. Sony and Marvel Entertainment would officially announce Spider-Man 4's release date. This release date would be confirmed by Sony themselves by a tweet the same day of the announcement. according to an interview with producer Todd Black. At this point in time, they finally figured out who the villain was going to be, and fans were going to love who they picked. Once again, Sony or Raimi was not a fan of whatever David Lindsay Aubert had to offer, because several months later in July, another screenwriter, Gary Ross, would be brought in to once again rewrite the script. At this point, many fans would begin to realize that there was some drama going on behind the scenes. Sam Raimi was clearly not liking the scripts being presented, causing even more delays in the production of the film. Raimi did not embrace all of James Vanderbilt's ideas for the fourth film, but Marvel and Columbia did, who'd hire James Vanderbilt to write Spider-Man 5 and 6. According to Variety, Spider-Man 5 and 6 would have an interconnected storyline, tying the two films together. The decision to write a fifth and sixth film was very confusing at the time, since it was unknown if Sam Raimi would even return for more films after the fourth one. The question was, why was James Vanderbilt writing an interconnected series of films so far in advance, despite the rocky future of Sam Raimi's involvement? Well, keep these two films in mind because they become relevant much later. In an interview with MTV, Raimi states that Spider-Man 4 was scheduled to begin filming in early March of 2010. The film was still in pre-production as Gary Ross was still working on the script. Raimi also brought in a new set designer who is currently working on the environments for the film. VFX supervisor
Learn how to read, you illiterate stupid twat-brained loser
was also brought on into the production. Ignoring how Spider-Man 4 had already cycled through two writers, production for Spider-Man 4 seemed to be going at a steady pace. In fact, around this time, storyboard artist Jeffrey Henderson would create a series of storyboards depicting several scenes from the film. These storyboards would be turned into animatics by David E. Duncan, showing just how far in development the film had gotten. On January 5th and 6th, Deadline Hollywood would reveal two emails sent to the VFX team. The emails state that Spider-Man 4 had been postponed due to a story issue brought up by Sam Raimi. The VFX crew were encouraged to find other work in the meantime while they sorted out these issues.
Well, right now we're working on it, and everybody's intention is to get it out for 2011. We're totally in process in terms of the development of the story, and there's really good stuff there.
According to Deadline, Sam Raimi was very vocal about the script, stating that he hated all three scripts provided by the three screenwriters. In fact, at the time of this article, Sony and Raimi were awaiting yet another script from Spider-Man 2 and 3 screenwriter Alvin Sargent, 4 different scripts within the span of several months. All these problems with the script were delaying the film by a significant amount. The release and production of the film was now uncertain, but the cast and crew would learn just how far the film was postponed in mid-January. The Hollywood Reporter releases an article announcing Spider-Man 4's cancellation. After pouring millions into the film's development, Sony decided to scrap the film entirely and instead reboot the franchise with a new director and cast. This new reboot was set during Peter Parker's high school days, and the reboot was based off a script written by James Vanderbilt. It turns out that when James Vanderbilt was brought on to write Spider-Man 5 and 6, he was actually writing the reboot that would be used as a backup just in case Raimi could not finish Spider-Man 4 on time.
I was originally hired to write Spider-Man 4 and was really sort of excited to come in and do that because I wanted to, no one had sort of finished out a superhero franchise before, sort of on purpose. And so that was like a really attractive thing. So Laura Ziskin and Avi Arad sort of brought me in to do that. And then through various kind of, machinations, the movie didn't end up getting made. So Amy Pascal called me and she said, listen, we're not gonna end up making Spider-Man 4, but would you be interested in helping us to start again?
Now with all this out of the way, let's dive deeper into the creative problems with Spider-Man 4 and how Sam Raimi and Sony's vision for the film clashed.
Well, I don't know if it'll be bigger and better. I think I'm going to try and make it smaller and worse. No, I'm going to try and make it more intimate. Find the heart of what made Spider-Man great originally in the comic books. I'm going to try and return to the central core of the character that I fell in love with. And in that way, I'll try and make it better.
When crafting Spider-Man 4, Raimi wanted the film to be the greatest Spider-Man film he's ever made. In order to help craft Peter Parker's arc, Raimi and Sony needed to pick the right villain to counter and complement Peter Parker's arc. There were many rumors about which villain would be present in the film. Villains such as Morlun, Morbius, Electro, and Carnage were all rumored to appear. Sam Raimi even gave a wish list of villains he hoped would be featured in the film, such as the Vulture, Electro, and the Sinister Six. At the time, the most likely villain and the villain fans were hoping would appear was the Lizard, played by Dylan Baker. Kurt Connors was introduced in Spider-Man 2 and once again appeared in Spider-Man 3. It only made sense for him to go through his Lizard transformation. According to Dylan Baker, him and Raimi toyed with the idea of the Lizard appearing in a future film. A Spider-Man 3 producer and Stan Lee also hoped to see the Lizard appear in Spider-Man 4. There was also many articles claiming that the Lizard would indeed be the villain of the film. The true villain of Spider-Man 4 would be revealed in December of 2009. According to Movie Line, the Vulture would serve as the film's main antagonist, with actor John Malkovich in talks for the role. The Vulture was originally the villain of Spider-Man 3, and actor Ben Kingsley was eyed for the role. His arc in the film would have been that of a revenge story. After Spider-Man puts him behind bars, he'd team up with the Sandman, break out of prison, and hatch a revenge plot against Spider-Man. According to storyboard artist Jeffrey Henderson, Raimi knew how much of a joke fans viewed the Vulture, so he wanted to make the character the most formidable opponent Spider-Man has ever faced. But as expected, fans are sometimes hard to please. A look through the comment sections of articles at the time and you'll find an abundance of negative comments. Fans claimed that the Vulture was terrible, lame, and outdated, and Raimi should go for someone cooler like Carnage or the Lizard. One other villain featured in Spider-Man 4 was Black Cat. At the time, there were several actresses rumored for the role, such as Rachel McAdams, but she denied these rumors early on. Deadline would reveal that Anne Hathaway was wanted for the role, but at this point, there was no definitive castings for the part. Rumors at the time reported that Anne Hathaway would not be playing Black Cat, but a new character named the Vultress. However, this rumor would be unsubstantiated. The decision to make Black Cat Vulture's daughter is a weird creative choice, but there's a very simple explanation for this decision. According to The Hollywood Reporter, in an article from January 5th, 2010, Sony and Raimi were having heavy arguments regarding the villain of the film. Raimi apparently wanted the Vulture as the main antagonist. Sony, who had a heavy dislike of the character, were pushing hard for a Black Cat romantic subplot with another villain serving as the secondary antagonist. Essentially, while Raimi wanted just the Vulture, Sony forced the Black Cat into the story and pushed Raimi to include a secondary antagonist. Many writers tried to marry the visions of the two parties, but all of it ended in failure. To put it simply, writers tried to combine Raimi's vision for Vulture and Sony's vision for Black Cat in order to appease both sides. This would explain why Black Cat is Vulture's daughter in the film. Not much is known about Spider-Man 4's plot, but we can piece together some elements based off rumors, interviews, and officially released material. The film would begin with a montage of Spider-Man defeating many C and D-list villains, such as the Rhino, the Prowler, the Shocker, Stiltman, and Mysterio. When it comes to Mysterio, there's a chance Bruce Campbell would have played the role, connecting all of his cameos from Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 in a unique and brilliant way. Bruce Campbell denies being offered the role during a Comic-Con Q&A, but it's likely that his role was not yet set in stone. According to Raimi himself, he did consider including Campbell in the role, but it was not definitive at the time. At some point in the film, Peter would return home, only to find out that he's been evicted. It turns out that the building he lived in was deemed unsafe by the city of New York, and thus the whole building was being shut down completely. Peter moves out, starting a brand new phase of his adult life. After exposing Eddie Brock's lies in Spider-Man 3, Peter would now become a full-on employee within the Daily Bugle. Things seem to be going well for Peter career-wise, but a major change seems to have presented itself. The Daily Bugle has been bought off by a wealthy investor and now has a brand new editor. The Vulture also seems to have a daughter. Her name is Felicia Hardy, and she appears to be some kind of major figure within this world. Hardy would fall in love with Peter and uncover his identity as Spider-Man. Black Cat in the story would have served as a test for Peter to see if he'll remain committed to Mary Jane, which he doesn't. At some point in the story, Adrian Toomes would don his Vulture outfit and engage in a fight with a helicopter. Vulture easily dodges and weaves through the gunfire and eventually has the upper hand, causing the helicopter to spin out of control. Luckily, Spider-Man would appear in the nick of time, engaging in a battle with the Vulture. In the fight, Spider-Man would likely damage the Vulture's suit, ending the confrontation, but now Vulture has a massive grudge against Spider-Man for foiling his plans. Just like in Spider-Man 3's original plot, Spider-Man stops the Vulture the first time. However, in Spider-Man 4, Vulture returns with a vengeance. His suit is now clearly damaged after their first encounter. You can see all the mechanisms of the wings, and he's clearly not wearing his traditional armor. Vulture takes Spider-Man by surprise and slams him to a nearby building by dropping him from a high altitude. Peter cannot keep up with the Vulture's speed, his skill, and ruthlessness. Spider-Man has taken a beating before, but this is unlike anything he's ever experienced. Vulture is incredibly angry and violent. His sole purpose is to kill Spider-Man, and Peter was not prepared to face him. After a nearly lethal blow to his head, Vulture stabs Peter in the shoulder. Vulture unmasks Peter and is shocked to see his face. Vulture seems shocked and sad even. However, this sadness is quickly replaced by glee. Now the truth of Spider-Man's identity makes his death even sweeter. Vulture prepares to put an end to Spider-Man, who appears scared and desperate. Peter quickly kicks the Vulture away, who falls and is stabbed by his own wings. The Vulture is now bleeding out from his injuries and quickly rolls off the building in order to escape. During this whole fight sequence, Felicia Hardy appears to be observing the fight go down. She also witnesses her father falling to his death. With a shocked and heartbroken expression on her face. The Vulture is not dead yet, however. He manages to cling on for his dear life and slowly but painfully leaves the scene. He does not make it far, however, as he appears to crash land near a harbor. This is likely where the Vulture would meet his end. According to an article by Hey You Guys in 2009, after the death of the Vulture, Felicia Hardy would seek revenge on Spider-Man and take up the mantle of Black Cat. Due to Sony wanting an additional villain, Black Cat would likely team up with a new villain to help take down Spider-Man. This new villain would have likely been Kraven the Hunter, as Sam Raimi wanted to incorporate the villain in some way in the film, according to a recent interview. According to Michael Papajohn, who played Uncle Ben's killer, was set to reprise his role in Spider-Man 4. This may show how Peter's origin may have been featured again in some way. Most of Spider-Man 4's story is unknown. The story description I gave just now was purely speculation and not at all definitive. In actuality, Spider-Man 4's story was likely much different than we could have possibly imagined. Maybe one day, Raimi will bless the fans and give us a concrete answer regarding his vision for the film. There are many remnants of Spider-Man 4 remaining, such as the storyboards, the animatic, and the unmade game that was cancelled early in development, but the story of these games deserve a whole video to themselves.